You would think the last thing that the Secret Service would consider is transporting a US president inside a gangster's car. But they did. It was December 8, 1941, only one day after the Pearl Harbor attack. President Franklin Roosevelt needed to go from the White House to Congress to declare war on Japan. But given the sensitivity of the situation, the presidential car was deemed unsafe because it had no protective armor or bulletproof glass. Apparently back then, the US government was not allowed to spend more than $750 on the purchase of any single automobile, and a bulletproof car cost way more than that. This is according to Michael Riley, Roosevelt's head of Secret Service. It just happened that the infamous gangster Al Capone had a vehicle with bulletproof glass, which had been seized 9 years earlier by the Treasury Department. This is how Roosevelt became the first US president to ride in an armored vehicle. Fast forward a few decades and a number of failed and unfortunately successful assassination attempts on US presidents, and not only have we learned that a convertible is not a wise choice for transporting a president, but now the White House is comfortable spending $300 to $400 million each year just to securely transport the President of the United States. There are two vehicles in the presidential motorcade which are quite unique, and those are the presidential limousines. It's estimated that the president has anywhere between 16 and 20 of these. Sounds excessive, but it should all make sense in a minute. Before we continue, I think it's time to check out this stylish wristwatch from Holzkern, who's sponsoring this video. This watch is so unique, not just because of its sleek design, but also because it incorporates distinctive natural elements like wood and stone. And this is not just a one-off. Holzkern takes pride in creating stylish watches and beautiful jewelry with a touch of nature. Like this elegant pearl and silver necklace, which my wife loved when she saw it, but then she was furious when I told her it wasn't for her. Honey, it's not what you think. It's okay, I got her these badass sunglasses. That's actually what they're called. Holzkern strives to operate as sustainably as possible and also partners with organizations like the Jane Goodall Institute to support projects that have environmental protection and social support in mind. Whether it's for yourself, a loved one, or someone a loved one shouldn't know about, Holzkern has something unique to offer. Their young and creative team is based out of Austria, and they offer free shipping to the US and most EU countries within 2 to 5 days. You don't have to worry about customs fees or anything like that. Just click the link in the description and get an additional 15% off using the code THINK15. Within each motorcade, there are a few dozen vehicles, anything from police cars and Secret Service SUVs to ambulances and the two identical limos. These two limos even have the same license plate number. Which one does the president travel in? Your guess is just as good as mine. These two limos have bomb-proof bottoms, bulletproof doors and windows, and a variety of weapons on board. No wonder this limo weighs between 15 to 20,000 pounds. 2 bags of the president's blood type are also carried on board in case of an emergency. But let's say the president is campaigning and has to visit multiple cities in one day, which is not uncommon. Each city that the president travels to requires its own motorcade. But because everything has to be in place prior to the arrival of the president in each of those cities, all the required vehicles, including the 2 limos, are forward deployed to those cities. Adding in some redundancy for maintenance and other unexpected circumstances, it's not too hard to see why the president would have so many limos. But here's the interesting part. The cost associated with running a motorcade is huge, but actually not that significant. Not when compared to the cost of transporting the secure package in the first place. The secure package is part of the motorcade, made up of the 2 limos and a few Secret Service SUVs that immediately surround the limos. Prior to the president leaving his house, the White House, the vehicles that make up the secure package are loaded into C-17 Globemaster and sometimes C-5 Galaxy cargo planes. These heavy transport aircraft belong to the US Air Force, and as you can imagine, operating these giant birds is not cheap. We're talking $100,000 or more per flight hour. But things are about to get a lot more expensive for US taxpayers. If the president needed to fly somewhere that's not too far from the White House, Marine One lands in the South Lawn to pick him up. Marine One is the call sign for any Marine helicopter that's carrying the president. For longer distances, the president flies on Air Force One, which again is a call sign when the sitting president is on board an Air Force aircraft. As you can see, there is a pattern in the call signs. But let's say the president wants to visit a farm in Kankakee, Illinois, which President Biden did visit in May of 2022. First, Marine One would land in the South Lawn of the White House. In less than 10 minutes, the president is dropped off in Andrews Air Force Base, where he would typically go to hop on Air Force One. Air Force One flies the president to Chicago O'Hare International Airport. From there, it's just a 75-mile drive to Kankakee, but that's a waste of time for the president. He actually flies from O'Hare International Airport to the greater Kankakee Airport on Marine One. But wait, how did Marine One magically show up in Chicago to pick up the president? Another Marine helicopter had been previously loaded into a transport airplane and delivered to O'Hare, awaiting the president's arrival. Similarly, the secure package would have also been delivered to Kankakee Airport, waiting for the president to fly in on Marine One. Holy cow! You can see how a simple farm visit can become so costly, and US presidents visit at least 100 cities each year. The first Air Force One looked quite different from what we see today. In August 1959, President Eisenhower became the first US president to fly on a presidential jet plane. It was a modified Boeing 707 with the call sign SAM 970, where SAM indicated Special Air Mission. But its red, orange, and black livery, which was designed by the Air Force, made the airplane look like a full-fledged military aircraft. That was until a famed industrial designer named Raymond Loewy, who had designed things like the first Coca-Cola dispenser, the Greyhound buses, and popular logos for Exxon and Shell, consulted the Kennedy administration on a new color scheme for Air Force One. That's how the current steel blue and water blue became the look of the iconic Air Force One, and even Air Force Two, which carries the vice president. The two Boeing VC-25 airplanes, which currently serve as Air Force One, are a military version of the Boeing 747. One of them is just the president's transport, while the other one is nicknamed the Doomsday Plane. It's basically a command center where the president and his team could operate from, including orders to launch nuclear weapons. Both airplanes are believed to be able to withstand electromagnetic pulse from a nuclear detonation. But Air Force One was not always called Air Force One. Previously, the airplane's actual call sign would be used, even when the president was on board. But in 1953, when Easter Airlines 8610, a commercial flight, crossed paths with the Air Force 8610, which was carrying President Eisenhower, it became obvious to everyone involved that a unique call sign would greatly reduce confusion. The Air Force One designation became official in 1962. Over the years, this designation has expanded to Marine One, Army One, Navy One, Ground Force One, and even the unofficial Rail Force One. You could probably guess what each of those call signs refer to, but have you ever heard of Executive One? The story of Navy One is interesting because only one aircraft has ever been designated as Navy One, and that's a Lockheed S-3 Viking, which transported President George W. Bush to aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln on May 1, 2003. That mission accomplished banner was in reference to the invasion of Iraq, which had begun 6 weeks earlier. George W. Bush is the only US president to have come to a full stop with the help of an arresting cable. Ground Force One refers to the black armored bus that carries the US president when he has to be on the road for longer periods. there are actually two Ground Force Ones, which the Secret Service purchased for a sweet $1.1 million each when President Obama was campaigning for his second term in office. One of the features of this bus is its run-flat tires. Conventional tires use pressurized air to support the weight of the vehicle. But when the tire is punctured, air escapes and the weight of the vehicle can no longer be supported. A run-flat tire also uses pressurized air to support the vehicle's weight, but it also has a backup. It has sidewall supports which are designed on a molecular level to resist the buildup of heat and maintain their shape under pressure. So even though the tire may lose air, the vehicle can continue driving for tens of miles before the repair can be performed. Rail Force One is not an official designation. It was used to refer to the overnight train that took President Biden from Poland to Ukraine to visit Kyiv in February 2023. And finally, Executive One is the call sign used when a president is on a civilian aircraft. This is not a common occurrence for obvious security reasons, but on December 26, 1973, then-President Richard Nixon became the only sitting president to travel on a regularly scheduled commercial airline. But why would Nixon do such a thing? This was at a time when there was fuel shortages across the US, so Nixon and his family supposedly flew the commercial flight from Washington to California to save taxpayers' money. But it was all a photo op. Air Force One ended up flying to California empty because regardless, it had to pick up the president and bring him back to Washington after the holidays.